Lily had always been a night owl. She loved the serenity that came with the late hours, the quiet streets, and the stillness that allowed her thoughts to flow uninterrupted. It was on one such night, while she was returning from her favorite 24-hour cafe, that she first felt it. A prickling sensation at the back of her neck, like she was being watched. She shrugged it off as paranoia, a product of too much caffeine and too many horror movies. But as she walked, the feeling persisted. She quickened her pace, her heart thudding in her chest. The shadows seemed to lengthen, reaching out with dark fingers that brushed against her skin. She glanced over her shoulder, but saw nothing unusual, just the empty street and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. By the time she reached her apartment building, she was almost running. She slammed the door shut behind her, locking it with shaking hands. Her apartment was her sanctuary, filled with warm light and the comforting hum of the refrigerator. She leaned against the door, trying to calm her racing heart. Lily's apartment was on the 5th floor, and she had a clear view of the street below. She glanced out of habit, and her blood ran cold. A figure stood in the pool of light from a street lamp, looking up directly at her window. She couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette of a tall, thin person. She stepped back, her breath hitching. "It's just a coincidence," she whispered to herself. "It's just someone standing there." But the rationalization felt hollow. The next day, she tried to brush off the incident. She went to work, met friends for lunch, and told herself she was overreacting. But when she returned home that night, the feeling of being watched came back stronger than before. She didn't dare look out the window again. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling never left. Lily started to notice small, strange occurrences. Objects in her apartment would be slightly out of place. Drawers she was sure she had closed were ajar, and sometimes she could have sworn she heard faint footsteps behind her. She changed the locks, installed security cameras, but nothing seemed to help. One night, unable to sleep, she sat in her living room, sipping tea and trying to read. A thud from her bedroom made her jump. She set her cup down, her hands trembling. She stood up, listening. Silence. She walked towards the bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. She pushed open the door and flicked on the light. The room looked normal. She was about to turn away when she noticed something that made her blood turn to ice. On her bed, where she had left her favorite book, was a note written in a shaky hand. "I see you." Lily backed out of the room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She grabbed her phone and called the police. They arrived quickly, but their search turned up nothing. No sign of forced entry, no evidence of anyone else in the apartment. They left, advising her to stay with a friend for the night, but she refused. This was her home, and she wouldn't let fear drive her away. She locked herself in her bedroom, a knife clutched in her hand. Hours passed, and the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. She was drifting off to sleep when she heard it, a whisper so faint she almost missed it. "Lily!" Her eyes flew open and she sat up, her heart pounding. The room was dark, the shadows deep and impenetrable. She strained her ears, listening. "Lily!" It was coming from the closet. She forced herself to stand, every instinct screaming at her to run. She approached the closet, her hand shaking as she reached for the door handle. She yanked it open, expecting to see nothing. Instead, she saw him, a gaunt figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. He reached out with skeletal hands, and she screamed, dropping the knife as she stumbled back. The next morning, the police found her. She was huddled in a corner, muttering to herself, her eyes wide with terror. They searched the apartment again, but there was no sign of anyone else. The cameras had recorded nothing unusual. Lily never returned to her apartment. She moved in with her parents, far away from the city. She never spoke of what happened, but her eyes always held a haunted look, as if she was constantly on guard, waiting for the watcher in the shadows to return.